right, good morning everybody. We're going to get started here. Good morning and welcome to the Hispanic Millennial Report panel. My name is Catherine Jobel. I'm the moderator, and you'll be hardly hearing from me because these two gentlemen have a lot to share with you all today. Just a little bit about me. My name is Catherine Jobel. I am the co-founder and publisher of Los Tweens, and we just changed our tagline, so I'm going to read it, which I never like to read, but I'm going to read it. So Los Tweens is the only multicultural and bilingual platform helping parents survive and thrive with children ages 7 to 17. And I am also the founder and president of Siren Marketing, which is a public relations, marketing, and digital firm based here in South Florida. So without further ado, though, I am going to introduce our two panelists. Today we have with us Jose Villa. Jose is the founder and president of Census, a cross-cultural advertising agency with digital at its core. Jose founded Census as a web development firm in 1998, as one of the first agencies focusing on the Hispanic digital market. He has since grown it into a unique full-service ad agency. His work in the market is published regularly on Media Post, Ad Age, HispanicAd.com, and his own blog, Think Multicultural. So he also is another blogger. And joining him today is Mario Carrasco. He is the co-founder of Think Now Research. Mario started in the Hispanic arena as marketing director for Hispanic Business Magazine, and then moved on to Microsoft, where he joined MSN Latino, creating targeted microsites and partner portals. Mario was hired by Garcia Research in 2008 to develop the first representative Hispanic online panel, Cada Cabeza, which has since grown into the leading Hispanic online panel in the market. So without further ado, gentlemen, I will let you present all your great findings and
Good morning, buenos dias. Hopefully everyone had their cafe and ready to go. We got a lot of data to share with you today. So we have a lot of time today, so hopefully you guys have lots of questions to ask us, and as we go through the presentation, you'll get stimulated to join the conversation here. What we're going to do today basically is kind of walk you through a little bit of introduction about us and our companies, and give you kind of a setup of why we did this, why we decided to do this Hispanic Millennial project. And then we're going to basically walk you through the initial findings. As you'll see in the presentation, this is a multi-phase report. So this is the first phase that's being unveiled here at Hispanicize. And then we're going to end up at the end with kind of a sneak preview of what's to come. There's going to be a couple of other waves that we're going to be presenting. So in case you guys want to tweet at us, find us online, this is where you can find us in terms of Twitter, LinkedIn, and then our blogs. Did you get the picture? All right, so a little introduction. So you heard the spiel about Census. We're based in LA. We have an office in Washington, D.C., and we just opened up an office in Atlanta. Our thing is that we basically combine Hispanic, African American, Asian, and general market capabilities in one agency. So we don't view multicultural as a silo. We view it as part of the mainstream, which I'm sure you've heard a lot of. That's kind of our business model. And I'll turn it over to Mario to talk.
Hi, everyone. And so a little bit about Think Now. We're a full-service market research agency specializing in U.S. Hispanic. Really trying to apply the new methodologies, online, mobile, to this audience. In addition to full service, we own and operate our own online panel, which we drew the sample for the project from, and also have a mobile panel.
So why Hispanic Millennials? That's probably a question everyone in here is asking themselves. I'm sure you've heard a lot of buzz about this segment of the Hispanic population. The first thing that's important to note is what a large percentage of the population we currently represent. That's probably reason number one why everybody's talking about Hispanic Millennials. When you look at the generational breakdown, they represent 25% of the Hispanic market, and when you add in the next generation, whatever they're going to call them, Gen Zs, plurals, we'll find out what they end up being called, but you can see that more than half of the Hispanic population is under 35. So this is an incredibly important demographic. Everybody's just from a sheer numbers perspective. And currently, Hispanics over-index in terms of the millennial population, right? So Hispanics are 17% of the population in the United States. However, they're 21% of the millennial population. And that number is going to rapidly increase just in the next 6 years. They're almost going to reach a quarter of the millennial population. So they're growing in terms of a population, a young population, faster than other groups. And in a lot of markets, like here in Miami, they already represent the majority. So if you're reaching millennials, if you're trying to reach a millennial audience in Miami, it's a Hispanic millennial audience. In LA, it's the same thing. The majority of millennials in LA are already Hispanic. And in some other really big markets that you wouldn't expect it, they're getting close. Places like Houston, 41% of the millennial population is Hispanic. So already on a regional basis, this is the majority of the youth population. And by the way, just so we're upfront about our definitions, we're using 18 to 34 as our definition of millennials, which works perfectly if you're in the media business as well. So it's a great way to find media. And this is also another interesting trend. We spent a lot of time thinking about non-traditional markets. Basically outside of LA, Miami, New York, Chicago. These are some of the fastest growing Hispanic markets in places in the Southeast, like Raleigh-Durham, Charlotte, Atlanta, even in the Midwest. And they're also growing very rapidly, Hispanic millennials, in these non-traditional markets, which is interesting. Which will get to something that we're going to talk about a little bit later about foreign-born versus US-born. And anybody in the CPG business or selling to households with kids is already focused on the Hispanic market just because they're Hispanics and Asians are really the only demographic groups that are still having lots of kids. That's why a lot of CPGs are focusing on them. And so, in terms of household sizes, Hispanics are really the only growth market left outside of Asians. So another important reason to focus on Hispanic millennials. And kind of lost in all this buzz and talk about Hispanic millennials is this really important fact, which is 44% of them are foreign-born. Everyone just assumes that Hispanic millennials are US-born, English only, completely acculturated, and that's not necessarily true. And that's really one of the big reasons why we wanted to do this research. And so why another Hispanic millennial research study? There's a couple different reasons. There's some really interesting stuff out there that we wanted to build upon. MTV3 has been doing a lot of qualitative research on this segment, which we think is interesting, and we definitely piggybacked on some of that. But there wasn't a lot being done on a quantitative basis. And there wasn't a lot sort of really digging into the differences among Hispanic millennials, comparing them to other groups of millennials, comparing the US and foreign-born, which is something we really wanted to look at, and then investigating and exploring this idea of points of tension. In advertising and marketing, we really try to identify these places where there's tension between maybe things that you believe and the cultural norms that you live in, or the environment in which you live in, the things you say versus the things you do. And we think that there's a lot of inherent points of tension with the Hispanic millennial population. So we wanted to investigate that, and that's why we decided to do the Hispanic Millennial Project.
Okay. So this little, like Jose mentioned, this is a joint research project between Census and Think Now Research. Really wanted to do a deep dive quantitatively into Hispanic millennials, looking at their non-Hispanic millennial cohorts, and then the older 35 plus Hispanic cohort. We have done a co-branded site, HispanicMillennialProject.com, that is live now. You can sign up. This study will be available for download. We'll be doing multiple waves, so you'll get alerts. There'll be blog updates. And then so, it's live now that you can sign up. A little bit about the methodology here. This is fresh off the press, it just got completed March 19th.
This is a sneak, you guys are getting the first taste of
this. So we completed a total of 900 interviews, 300 base size for each of the cohorts. As Jose mentioned, we're defining millennials 18 to 34 for Hispanic. Non-Hispanic white millennials, same 18 to 34, and it is important to note that we are just looking at non-Hispanic whites, so it doesn't include African American, Asian, or other ethnic groups. And for all of the samples, We weighted it to match US Census regions, so the 4 main census regions and the 9 subregions for gender and age as well. Some of the acronyms, I won't go through all of them, but this is kind of what we'll be using in the data here in the graphs. HM for Hispanic Millennials, FHM for Foreignborn Hispanic Millennials. So this first section here, looking at Hispanic Millennials versus non-Hispanic white Millennials.
He is good at this. Okay. Did I skip a second? No, this is the first one. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys. So Hispanic Millennials versus Hispanic 35 plus. So this is the first group we wanted to compare. In terms of what are the differences between Hispanics and their basically their older counterparts, maybe their parents, their grandparents. Yeah, this is. Okay. So these are some of the areas where we noticed a lot of difference. So again, comparing younger Hispanic Millennials to older Hispanic Millennials, a couple things popped out. We'll let you guys obviously get a copy of this, so there's a lot of data in here. But the first thing is satisfaction where they are in their life. So this is kind of interesting. 61% of Hispanic Millennials said that they're satisfied with their place in life today. 70% of them are optimistic, either extremely optimistic or optimistic about the future. And there was almost a 20-point difference between older Hispanics. Only 49% of them said that. And then you can see some other things around religion, saving money, marriage. We got into some social issues in terms of comparing the two, and those are also interesting. Some of these are less surprising. They're kind of things that we would expect. But this is an interesting one at the end. I want to stand out as a Latino. Only 52% of Hispanic, older Hispanics, 35 plus, said that, whereas 67% of Hispanic Millennials stated that they wanted to stand out as Latino. In terms of, we also looked at indicators of success and future goals. And a couple things that stood out there. Future goals, being happy with yourself regardless of what you have. So 43% of Hispanic Millennials said that that is the case. And their older counterparts tended to not agree as much with that idea, which is kind of an interesting. You'll see that there's some conflict in some of the later questions that we asked. Again, getting into this idea of points of conflict, points of tension. And then again, this idea of Latino culture and how they feel about that. I feel closer, somewhat closer to Latino culture. 47% of Hispanic Millennials said that versus only 32% of Hispanic 35 plus. So again, that was not something we expected to see. In a sense, Hispanic Millennials are being more drawn to their culture than their older counterparts.
So this section here, looking at Hispanic Millennials versus non-Hispanic Millennials. This is really an overview of the questions that we went over in the study. Something that jumped out really are optimism in general. So looking at satisfaction where they are currently in life, you see Hispanic Millennials, 61% of them satisfied versus only 50% of non-Hispanic Millennials. And that theme is really driven home with optimism about the future. So extremely optimistic and optimistic about the future, 70% of Hispanic Millennials versus 52% of non-Hispanic Millennials. And one thing that jumped out that was interesting as well is looking at quality of life in respect to better off than their parents. We asked that of both Hispanic Millennials and non-Hispanic Millennials, and 65% of Hispanic Millennials agree that they are better off than their parents versus only 43% of non-Hispanic Millennials. And something that we expected, looking at heritage being important to Millennials, see that really Hispanic Millennials jump out almost 80%, of Hispanic millennials feel that heritage is very important to them, versus 59% of non-Hispanic millennials. And an interesting point of tension there, looking at wanting to fit in with the mainstream, we see that heritage is important among Hispanic millennials, yet almost 50% of them want to fit in with the mainstream, as opposed to only 30% of
doesn't quite make sense, right? If it's kind of, yeah, another interesting, they want to be, and we've seen other research that says, they don't want to be targeted as Hispanic, but they want companies and brands to acknowledge their Hispanic culture. So it's like, which one is it, right?
And I guess tied to optimism and where they are with life, this was an interesting point, getting ahead even having to sacrifice what they enjoy. 65% of Hispanic millennials agree with that statement, with only 42% of non-Hispanic millennials. Here we're looking specifically at future goals. And I think one of the things that jumped out at me that was interesting is that we see Hispanic millennials overall really striving for kind of traditional views of success and future goals. So owning a car, for example, like owning a nice car is not a goal. 45% of non-Hispanic millennials agree with that, which is something that we've seen in the media in terms of car ownership. But among Hispanic millennials, only 29% agree with owning a nice car is not a goal. So that owning a nice car is something that Hispanic millennials strive for. Also, having a respectable job is not a goal for me. 23% of non-Hispanic millennials agree with that statement, with only 9% of Hispanic millennials agreeing with that statement. So having a respectable job is, the majority of Hispanic millennials are striving for that. And that's, I think, also tied to wealth. Being wealthy is not a goal for me. We see that almost 50% of non-Hispanic millennials agree with that, versus only 35% of Hispanic millennials. So, wealth is significantly more goal among Hispanic millennials than non-Hispanic millennials. And some other things that we'll dive into regarding kind of traditional indicators of success or future goals, education, and owning a business, which we'll get into in some of the later slides here. This theme of the strong indicators of success, owning a home, 53% of Hispanic millennials see owning a home as a strong indicator of success, versus only 42%. So again, kind of these traditional markers of success, a little more pronounced among Hispanic millennials. Getting an advanced degree, 42% of Hispanic millennials see that as a strong indicator of success. So 42% versus only 23% there. And then we delved in a little bit into millennials living at home with their parents and how they contribute to finances. We see that millennials that live at home, 22% of Hispanic millennials contribute to the household finances, versus only 9% of non-Hispanic millennials, which we thought was a really interesting difference there.
Yeah, when we were preparing for this, we were just talking about some things that we were noticing, thinking about brands, for instance, and also this, a couple things that stood out to us as big differences between Hispanic and non-Hispanic millennial. One is, we said Prozac's in the room. It's an interesting. It would be interesting for them to go after non-Hispanic millennials, because they just generally seem to be less optimistic, kind of have a more dim view of the future, whereas Hispanic millennials are just much more optimistic and think things are going to be okay. And then non-Hispanic millennials just don't contribute. I guess they're more of they're totally living off mom and dad and not contributing to the finances, whereas Hispanic millennials, it's still a small number, but it clearly indicates something directionally there, that when they do live at home, they're contributing. Like that is part, and it's a huge difference. We think.
Yeah, it's statistically significant there.
So then this is really one of the areas that we really wanted to delve into that we hadn't seen a lot of research on, which is U.S.-born Hispanic Millennials versus foreign-born Hispanic Millennials. So we're trying to go through some of the top lines here on the next slide. So some interesting things popped up here. You know, we hear a lot about how millennials are less connected to religion, have you know, differing views about traditional marriage and things like that. We start to see some differences when you break down U.S.-born versus foreign-born Hispanic Millennials. The first one that really popped to us was religion. 62% of foreign-born U.S. Hispanic Millennials say that religion plays a big part in their life. And that's a pretty big difference with only 44% of the U.S.-born Hispanic Millennials. Want to fit in with the mainstream? This is interesting too. You know, we saw a large number for the aggregated Hispanic Millennial, but when you break it out by U.S.-born versus foreign-born, you see that it's really the foreign-born who want to fit in. And you know, in a sense, that sort of makes sense. They're immigrants; they want to sort of, you know, be part of American mainstream culture. Whereas U.S.-born Hispanic Millennials don't want to fit in as much, right? So we start to see a little bit of a difference there. In terms of meaning of the American dream, being happy with yourself regardless of what you have. So that's very much a U.S.-born Hispanic Millennial sort of perspective, whereas the foreign-born don't agree with that. Only 34% of them. And then having children. This is another really interesting one we would never have guessed. But for the foreign-born, only 13% said having children was a part of the American dream, whereas their U.S.-born counterparts, almost 3 times as many of them said that that was the case. And then owning a home, we talked about that before. That really splits again between, it's really being driven by the foreign-born Hispanic Millennials who really say that owning a home is important to them. And then starting to look at the 4-year college education. Again, here's an interesting break, right? So we saw that that number was larger when you compared Hispanic Millennials versus non-Hispanic Millennials, but that's really being driven by the foreign-born Hispanic Millennials. They're the ones who are putting more of an emphasis on graduating from 4-year college. And their U.S.-born counterparts are probably more like the general market in that sense. So. In terms of future goals, we saw a lot of differences here between the two groups. So, you know, some of the big ones, financially comfortable. Like, you know, so in a sense, if you sort of summarize all this up, you see that the foreign-born Hispanic Millennials are more concerned with being financially comfortable, owning a home, having a reasonable job, getting a degree. A lot of these traditional indicators of success, you know, almost like these Gen X or Boomer type indicators of success, and they deviate from the U.S.-born Hispanic Millennials in terms of. I mean, they're still pretty high, and they're higher than the general market, but we're starting to see a break there. And then there's some other things. We started to look at brands, which brands appeal to them. We'll put that in the full report. We're not going to get into that as much today, but we definitely looked at that. So, so now this
is so here, next couple of slides, kind of looking at the themes that we saw overall through the data. We saw Hispanic Millennials in general, but really driven by the foreign-born are much more optimistic. And so this breaks out the data in terms of agreeing with how satisfied you are with the direction of the U.S. is going. We see Hispanic Millennials overall significantly more satisfied with the direction of the U.S. than non-Hispanic Millennials, so 63% of Hispanic Millennials versus only 39% of non-Hispanic Millennials. And again, that optimism really driven by the foreign-born Millennials. And looking at the older cohorts, you do see that, you know, overly more optimistic than non-Hispanic Millennials, but the Millennials really pop in terms of that optimism and you know, satisfaction with the direction the U.S. is going.
Again, the depressed non-Hispanic Millennial.
And another thing that we saw kind of emerge from this data that we thought was really cool is Hispanic Millennials continue to be driven by this concept of the American dream. So this slide here is looking at the statement, the American dream is something that I believe in. We see that 71% of Hispanic Millennials overall, inclusive of US and foreign-born, agree with that statement, versus only 55% of non-Hispanic Millennials. I think it's some of that optimism that we see. And here we kind of see a flip in terms of US-born versus foreign-born. US-born, 73% of Hispanic millennials agree with the statement that American dream is something I believe in, versus only 65% of the foreign-born. But overall, again, the older cohort as well still believe in the American dream versus the non-Hispanic millennials. And this is looking at the American dream kind of slightly different way. Looking at the statement, the American dream is something that I strive for. Again, we see Hispanic millennials really, striving for, not only just believing, but striving for the American dream. 67% of Hispanic millennials overall agree with that statement versus only 54% of non-Hispanic millennials. And this one driven slightly more by the foreign-born Hispanic millennials in terms of striving for that. And this is, we went over this in previous slides, but Hispanic millennials having a different perception of success. And again, this kind of delving deeper into this idea that having children is very important to me. You can really kind of see a stark difference here between Hispanic millennials and non-Hispanic millennials. So 71% of Hispanic millennials believing that having children is important, which was really interesting. And we see that driven by the foreign-born Hispanic millennials. So 71% of Hispanic millennials overall feel that having children is very important, versus 64% of non-Hispanic, and driven by the foreign-born at 74%.
Which, if you remember, this is another point of conflict. The foreign-born Hispanic millennials stated that this was not a definition of success, having children, but they do view it as important. So again, something interesting there, with a little bit of cognitive sort of dissonance between one, they're saying things from two different sides of the mouth in terms of having children.
Yeah. And this is kind of consistent with what we thought. Hispanic millennials place less importance on marriage than their older Hispanic counterparts, but still more than the non-Hispanic millennial counterparts. So we see 68% of Hispanic millennials overall believe that marriage is important to them, but really driven by foreign-born millennials. But we see kind of a difference here among their older cohorts. So 73% of the 35 plus Hispanics believing that marriage is important. And another thing that we saw kind of pop out from the data is this heightened sense of importance to higher education. So a future goal here, graduating from a four-year college, is 46% of Hispanic millennials see that as a goal, versus only 31% of non-Hispanic millennials. I think, again, tied to that optimism. And among the foreign-born, we see that graduating from a four-year college is really a strong indicator of success. So this idea of higher education really driven by that foreign-born Hispanic millennial. And this among Hispanics who plan to get a college degree or have a college degree, we see that 84% of Hispanic millennials plan on getting a graduate degree. So this is even a starker difference in the four-year college versus only 57% of non-Hispanic millennials.
So the fourth, I guess the fifth theme that really sort of came up in our research, and was one that we obviously went into this research focusing on, was the foreign-born Hispanic millennial. In many ways, we kind of viewed them as the forgotten segment, and unfortunately so, because they're very different. So in terms of fitting in with, so here we talked about this question of I want to fit in with the mainstream. So non-Hispanic millennials basically don't want to fit in. But when you compare it to Hispanic foreign-born millennials, there was definitely a key difference here, and it was really driven by them more than the U.S. born. So there's this desire to fit in with the mainstream, which is very different than we see with basically U.S.-born U.S.-born millennials, whether they're Hispanic or non-Hispanic. So there's a difference there in terms of, we always hear about millennials. They want to really stand out. They want to, they want to stand for something. They want to, stand out in society. That's not so much the case when we're talking about foreign-born Hispanic millennials. And then we talked a little bit about this, but religion playing such an important role in my life. This was something that we weren't sure what was going to be the case, but we thought that there might be some differences. And for religious organizations, this is obviously good news in terms of Hispanic millennials that are born outside the U.S. It's still a significant majority of them still view religion as a key part of their life. And I'm sure these numbers change over time. These are not longitudinal studies, but it is interesting with that younger group to see, pretty stark difference, and particularly when you compare it to non-Hispanic millennials. I mean, there's almost a 20-point difference there. So this tends to be a much more religious group, which I think we think bucks the trend that you see more generally with millennials. And then we did delve into the question of media consumption. And again, there's been a lot of buzz and talk and new ventures targeting Hispanic millennials, Hispanic biculturals. A lot of it's been in English, fusion, a lot of these new online plays. And the prevailing notion has been, well, Hispanic millennials prefer English. And our data finds maybe not, right? So when you look at Spanish only and Spanish mostly in terms of what language do I consume media in, when you look at the Hispanic millennial foreign-born, 30%, a little north of 30% of them say Spanish mostly, 9% say Spanish only. So almost 40% of them are consuming Spanish media. And that doesn't count those that say that they're bilingual. They go both ways in terms of consuming both languages. And you compare that to the U.S.-born Hispanic millennial, which is below 20%, right? So it's almost double the percentage gap in terms of preferring Spanish language media. So, and that's, again, we talked about 44%. That's a sizable chunk of the Hispanic millennial population that's still consuming Spanish language media. So not something we were expecting, but definitely something that the data showed. And then there's this other notion. I love the idea of sort of breaking down a lot of these misconceived notions about the Hispanic market. And this is something that we saw. We want to delve into this a little bit further, but you talk to anybody who does Hispanic marketing, they'll tell you, oh, the female head of household is the primary decision maker and makes all the purchasing decisions in the Hispanic household. And I'm not saying that's not true for the majority of the time, but we saw something in the data that's interesting, and that we think we may need to start to reevaluate who is the primary decision maker, who is the primary breadwinner in the household, because of these Hispanics, millennials that are living in multi-generational households. And we know that's been the case for a long time, but when we looked at the breakdown in terms of, we asked that question earlier, you saw in terms of contributing financially to the household. So here's obviously a huge break with the non-Hispanics. We talked about this before. 30% of non-Hispanic millennials said, I don't contribute at all, compared to only 14%. So, again, a sort of side takeaway is the non-Hispanic millennial is a deadbeat, so it's not helping out with family. No, don't quote me on that. But this was interesting, right? And again, this was, these were for the people in the panel who said that they lived with their parents. 22% of them said that I pay for half of the household costs. Now, we want to delve into this a little bit further. We're not saying go run out and start targeting the Hispanic millennial in these multi-generational households, but it's interesting. We think that there's something there. We had seen some things in some other research that other organizations have done that kind of pointed us in that direction, and this includes rent and mortgage. We've done some work with other clients at Census where we've seen they're maybe buying premium packages of subscription TV because they're being driven by the Hispanic millennial who wants more advanced packages because they're paying for it. So this is something interesting we want to look at a little bit more, but we see definitely the potential that there's a new decision maker, or at least somebody else who is influencing those decisions significantly in this multi-generational Hispanic household. And then this is interesting. I pay for the majority of the household costs. So 8% of the Hispanic people said that, 0 of the non-Hispanic. And then this is another, this is not surprising in a sense. I'm sure some of you have seen the data around Hispanic business starts. Hispanics, particularly Hispanic women, are starting businesses at a faster clip than almost any other group, aside from a couple of other ethnic groups. But one of the things we saw is that Hispanic millennials are very entrepreneurial at heart, and that this is a big difference with their non-Hispanic counterparts. So when we ask questions around indicators of success for them, 47% of Hispanic millennials said owning your own business is a strong indicator of success. And that was a huge difference with a non-Hispanic millennial. They don't view starting or owning your own business as a strong indicator of success. There could be 1,000 different things sort of underpinning this, but they're still very much about starting businesses. They view this as something to aspire to, which is an interesting, you can start to think about which brands this might be interesting for, that are in servicing business owners, et cetera. And then in terms of it being a future goal, something that they do intend to do, 57% of foreign-born Hispanic millennials owning a business is a future goal, compared to only 45% of the US-born. So it's still a large number of the US-born Hispanic millennials who want to start a business, but it's significantly higher than the foreign-born. So that's interesting. The foreign-borns are coming here, and they want to start businesses more than the US-born counterparts. So that's kind of a lot of stuff. We didn't want to overwhelm you guys. There's a lot more that's going to be in the report. We'll have a lot more analysis, but we wanted to share with you the top line, and we think it's some pretty exciting stuff that we've uncovered. And then kind of what's next.
Yeah, and so we kind of just scratched the surface here and identifying some themes in this first wave. And in terms of what we're thinking for the follow-up waves, kind of delving more into healthcare, behaviors, motivations. Looking at creating a segmentation, we kind of see some really kind of primary segmentations pop out here, but really delving more and defining the Hispanic millennials. Also want to look into banking, financial service behavior, this new kind of head of household decision maker, and what the implications are from a financial perspective.
As well as this likely business owner.
Right.
So, very interesting target for financial services companies.
And then, further exploring some of the point of tensions that we pointed out among Hispanic millennials themselves, Hispanics and foreign-born, non-Hispanic millennial, really kind of delving deeper into that. And so, yeah, sign up. The site is live now, so you can sign up for updates. And this presentation will be available as well as future waves.
Thanks. We have time for questions.
All right, yes, we have time for questions. I'm going to start off the Q&A before you guys do, with a question that came from Twitter. Daniel Gonzalez on Twitter asked, are marketers abandoning the foreign-born Hispanic millennial segment? What are your thoughts?
I think they're ignoring it. That was one of the main reasons why we did this. We think everybody does it. We want to simplify a complex world. So it's a lot easier to paint a very broad brush. For me, I feel like this Hispanic millennial segment is very much like the Hispanic market generally 30 years ago, where everybody said, oh, Hispanics are, this. And it was a very simplistic picture of Hispanics that didn't take into account nationality differences, didn't take into account regions of the country, language, acculturation. So what we're hoping this does is start to sort of educate people that, hey, this is a much more complex segment than these broad generalizations about, they prefer to speak in English only, and they don't believe in religion anymore, and they're not getting married, and they're pessimistic about the future. Well, maybe it's not that simple. Maybe this is much more nuanced.
Great questions. I'm going to start all the way in the back corner. The website for the report is
HispanicMillennialProject.com. Millennial has 2 L's in the middle. I now know this.
All right, I'll keep going to the back of the room.
First, I want to say congratulations. I think it's a very interesting report. I look forward to the future research that you do on this. But I wonder if within the sample, you got a sense of the economic breakdown of the folks that you surveyed.
Yeah, we did gather those demographics is probably something that we can add. But one thing I can see is that non-Hispanic millennials versus Hispanic millennials, we see a higher income overall among non-Hispanic millennials, and that may be driving some of the financial contributions. But that is a good point. But we did gather all that demographic info.
And we also saw that the non-Hispanic millennial had a higher average education attainment than the Hispanic millennial. Not surprising.
I'm going to bounce back to this side.
How did you gather the data? Was that all online or was it mobile as well?
It was online and mobile. So our panel respondents can register via an online portal or through a smartphone.
And did you see a big difference between the non-Hispanic and Hispanic? Was mobile a lot higher?
That's actually a good point. We did gather that data. That is something we can explore. But we see overall that Hispanics definitely over-index in mobile surveys. Yeah.
You do. And I'm going to head right here. No, you.
Oh, sure. Does Hispanics desire to have nice cars and be a homeowner extend to premium goods? So in a given category, would they prefer a product that's more premium than
It sounds like a great topic for maybe a fifth wave of research. Yeah, we didn't delve into that idea of premium. So this is the first kind of the first wave. So we wanted to take a stab at some big, broad topics. We didn't dive into that in level of detail yet.
But there were actually some of the brands though that we saw kind
Yeah.
of pop.
Yeah, that's right. You're actually right. So we do have some data on some of the brands, so like Walmart versus Target, which could be some indicators of preferences for premium brands. So that'll be in the full report.
I'm going to head over here. Gentleman right there.
Yeah, Jose, what other brands did you probe? Walmart, Target, any others that you?
Walmart, Target, Apple. I think we looked at.
We looked at a bunch of electronics brands, Samsung. We looked at Apple,
Sony.
Sony. We looked at Sony. We looked at a bunch of retail brands. I think we looked at some telecom brands, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah,
It was we looked at about 15 to 20 brands, kind of major brands, Coke, some CPGs as well in there. So that stuff was overwhelming. There's so much data on that we just thought, okay, we're gonna put everybody to sleep. But that'll definitely be in the report. So.
Natasha.
Hey, hi, how you doing? This is a great project. Because Foreignborn affected so much and you were so surprised, did you do the demographics of the Foreignborn, as in Foreignborn at 2 years they came to the United States, or Foreignborn they came at 18, Foreignborn they came at 25? Because it makes a difference, a big difference between where they're born and stay and live as opposed to living here for a certain number of years.
Yeah, we did collect that data. So we have an acculturation algorithm that we ran on the respondents. So we gathered whether they're foreign-born, how many years they've been in the U.S., also kind of cultural affinity into whether they connect more with American culture or their country of origin culture. But that could be a whole other study as well. But we did gather that info.
Yeah, and that's one of the areas where we think there might be something interesting when we try to do a segmentation to see if that's one of the variables where we start to see clusters with certain things. So.
It's a note real quick. Did you also get the geographic? You took South America, the Caribbean, Hispanic.
We asked country.
We asked country of origin.
Okay.
And we tried to match that to, in terms of the census distribution, country of origin as well among all of the Hispanic cohorts.
So we have a representative basically of whatever, it's like 60-some-odd% Mexican, like 12% Cuban, and sort of breaks down by the national averages.
What was the sampling size? I got here a little late, so I was just curious.
So there's 900 overall, so 300 Hispanic millennials, 300 non-Hispanic millennials, and 300 35 to 64 Hispanics.
Any questions? Yeah.
Why do you think it is surprising that they may think that having kids is something that they have to do? And it's not associated specifically with the American dream, because maybe it's the way that they perceive it, their life has to be.
Yeah.
Not that
That's what I think.
Associated.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, I came here, and maybe I have my own house, I have this or that, but.
I'm very
something
interested
that-
in those kinds of questions, right?
Yeah,
Because it's sort of the it's what happens to any immigrant who comes to this country. You're in a new culture, and then you've got your sort of old traditional culture, and there are places where there's a conflict there. So I think that's one of those areas where they feel like they have to. but maybe they don't associate it with success in a way that that's more of an American thing. It's interesting. I mean, it's definitely something we want to investigate further.
And the other point I wanted to mention, because it's another thing that you said can be a conflict, is about, you know, when you said that they might think that having I mean, maybe they're not leaving their house because they might not have, you know, an option, an economical option of not living in their house. Or maybe, you know, they do not think about going abroad for school or for work, or they even think they don't have an opportunity to get involved in the society, so they have to start their own business. So maybe something, you know, that is easier to start my own business than to try to get into the system.
There was one question that we asked, which we know was interesting, where we asked, you know, traveling the world. It was something about world traveling. Is that something that you view as success? And that was not something for Hispanic millennials, but it was for non-Hispanic millennials. So that might kind of fit with the train of thought you're going back.
All right, so we're out of time, but I'm going to take one more question, and then I'm going to pose a question, and then we're going to can kind of attack them afterwards. So I'm going to take the question right here.
Okay, so you offered this survey in both Spanish and English, right?
Right.
How many people chose to take this survey in Spanish?
That's a data point that we have. I don't think we looked specifically at that.
Did it follow do you believe it followed the trend of what you saw about non-Hispanics or Hispanic millennials foreign-born consuming Spanish language?
Yeah, definitely. I would imagine that those percentages in terms of media consumption correlate pretty well with what they took the survey in.
All right, so my final question. If there is one takeaway or one myth that you feel that this report busted about Hispanic millennials, what would it be?
I guess I mean, there's so much.
Just one.
I think the optimism for me really popped out. I think we see a lot about millennials kind of being disenfranchised and overall as a group. And I think that among Hispanic millennials, especially foreign-born, we saw that really kind of reversed. And that's tied to, you know, the key indicators of success that we went through and the optimism. So I think that for me really popped out.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just the differences between those foreign-born group. I just think that's so incredibly interesting, and it's going to create a very interesting Hispanic world in the mix, because these are cohorts that are the same age, they live together, they live in the same city, so it's going to be very interesting to see how that comes together, right? In terms of, you know, we try to simplify the Hispanic market into something that we can just, it's a group, right? This just makes it more and more complex and interesting.
All right, thank you, Mario. Thank you, Jose. And they will be both available for questions after.